Hi, everyone. I am so excited to welcome Heath Einstein, the Dean of Admissions at Texas Christian University. Hi, Heath. Welcome to our interview series. We're so excited to have you here.
Hi, it's so good to be here, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I wanted us to start by talking a little bit about, TCU's relationship with the Christian church, right? Can you tell us a little bit about this and how this filters down into the everyday life of students?
Absolutely. And it's a really important question because when you have a name like Texas Christian University, I think there are some assumptions that are built in about what might the university be like or what it might not be like. And I've really taken my cues over the years from our Office of Religious and Spiritual Life and our university chaplains who do a great job of explaining what this all means because Texas Christian University was founded in 1873 by two ministers of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And if you're not familiar with that denomination, it's a fairly small Protestant stream that was founded in the middle part of the United States. And that's where a lot of the church's membership still is. And it's an ecumenical faith, meaning that there is space here for everybody. One doesn't necessarily need to be a member of the Christian church. One doesn't necessarily need to be Christian in order to attend Texas Christian University. So the relationship is foundational, it's historical. We're not governed by the church, but there's a relationship with the church. And there are students on this campus who certainly are Christian and for whom their faith is very important. We have people on our campus also who are Baha'i and Jewish and Hindu and Muslim and all faiths. So this is a really comfortable place in which to practice religion. And our Office of Religious and Spiritual Life is here to help students along their journey. Every student is required to take one class in a tradition, a religious tradition rather. That's part of our core curriculum. But what that religious tradition is, again, is entirely up to the student. So obviously at TCU, many classes on Christianity, but if a student would like to learn more about Caribbean religions or Eastern religions, that too would satisfy our religious traditions requirement.
That's great. Okay, so that's good to know. So only one religious class, right? Just
Right.
underscoring that for students and families who may just, when they look at Texas Christian University, exactly like as you mentioned, Heath, they may jump to conclusions. And so it's really great that you clarified that it's only one religious class and it could be in virtually anything,
Right.
right? And that's great for them to know. Perfect. So as I was looking through the website, right, the vision of Texas Christian University came up to be, the vision is to be a world-class, value-centered university, right, which I really love. And so growing up, I went to a convent school in India, and we really had this focus on value education. And in fact, we had a day that was carved out specifically for VE, is what we called it, value education. And, we just had discussions about how to become a better human being, right? And I really love the intentionality behind that and how that was considered really part of the core curriculum of the school. And that's why when I was looking through and doing my research on TCU, I really felt that connection and that bond, and I just wanted to be able to underscore that for families as well, right?
Thank you for doing that. You can see the intentionality in things like how we put our curriculum together. I alluded to our core curriculum earlier, and one of the planes that the courses are divided along is something called heritage, mission, vision, and values. And so these are not empty words that we just stick on on a report and shove into a cabinet somewhere, but these are things that have real meaning to all members of our community. And in fact, if you were to ask any member of the TCU community, whether it's a student, a faculty member, a staff member, or an administrator, what is the mission of TCU and what is the value of the value statement of TCU? They would probably be able to tell you, if not verbatim, they'd get really close.
And that's great. That's great. So we've spoken about this historic relationship, right? But beyond this, Heath, what are some of the strengths of TCU? So if you have to do like a countdown, and I know I'm putting you in a hard spot here, but if you had to do like this, top three, right, reasons why students should consider TCU, what would those be?
I would break it down in this way. TCU provides students opportunities for bold leadership. TCU does so in a very supportive environment and on a campus that is incredibly spirited. So I think TCU holds a unique position in the higher education ecosystem. It will be virtually impossible for a student to find a college that, on the one hand, has the abundant resources that TCU has, that plays in a high Division I athletic conference. So you've got that rah-rah school spirit that goes along with it. Need I mention that we played in the national championship football game last year? But on the other hand, provide students with the kinds of contact with faculty that you typically see at a school that is much smaller than we are. And that is because we are almost exclusively undergraduate. So that is, to me, the distinguishing factor, that you can have everything you'd want at a large research university, but the mentor-mentee relationships that you find at small colleges, that's the secret sauce.
Absolutely. And just to share with families who are, who may not know too much about the size, and, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you have about 10,000 undergraduate students, right, and a little shy of 2,000 graduate students, right? You can absolutely see the focus on the undergraduate education here.
And I think that most people, certainly most high school students, don't consider that ratio of undergraduate to graduate students. But what that signifies to you is where the institution is putting its resources. And our faculty are incredible. I mean, they're doing cutting edge research in their fields across the board. And they rely on our undergraduate students to help them to conduct that research. So if you're a student and you're considering a college where you need to compete against grad students for those research opportunities, or a place like TCU where they're going to be readily available, imagine what your resume is going to look like coming through TCU, having done research with faculty, having published papers, having presented at national conferences. That's pretty powerful.
Absolutely. And I think this is especially helpful for students who are interested in medicine and doing pre-med. And, that's just actually a super segue into my next question for you, which was really about what would you consider to be the top 3 majors at TCU?
That's always a tricky question because I don't want to get in trouble with any of my faculty. I always say we wouldn't offer the programs if we weren't really good in them. So I'll give you programs that probably get a lot of attention. For us, you mentioned pre-med, anything in that, anything in the natural sciences is really strong. We have a fantastic pre-health professions institute. Our students are getting into med school twice the national average. We have a medical school here at TCU. So that is one that's right off the bat. The program we're probably most known for is business. We have our Neely School of Business, consistently ranked in the top 20. Nationally, I think we benefit in many ways from our location in the DFW Metroplex. Fort Worth is part of the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area, and it's the number 4 market in the United States, so plenty of opportunities for students to get internships. That's across the disciplines. And then our most competitive program, the hardest program to get into historically, is nursing. We have a really, really strong nursing program, but we've got really so many other great programs like education and criminal justice and deaf and habilitation studies and a million other things that are really, really good. So I hate to choose. It's like choosing your favorite kid, right?
Absolutely. And again, for the School of Business, there was something that I was reading about wherein the students who want to study finance, I think there's a huge investment fund that they are able to, really manage. And was it 1.5 million? I'm
yes,
through my notes here, right, to see. And I thought that was incredible because it's supposed to be the largest in the country.
We have absolutely an investment fund that exceeds $1 million every year for our upper level finance students to manage. And every year they turn a profit. It's truly exceptional. It's like if you want financial advice, you should really come to our finance students. They're going to steer you correctly.
That's amazing. Right. Great. Thank you for, sharing all that with us. I want us to switch gears a little bit and really talk about admissions for a few minutes.
Sure.
So when students are applying to TCU, Heath, are they applying to the university? Are they applying to a particular major or a particular college? Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Yes. It's a little bit of both. So let me explain what I mean. On the application, the student is going to choose their intended major. Based on the response to that question, when admitted, we will funnel them into one of 7 different degree granting colleges. So like I mentioned, we've got our Neely School of Business. I mentioned pre-health, that's in our College of Science and Engineering. We've got our Harris College of Nursing and Health Sciences, where our nursing program is. And we've got several other colleges as well. So if you are a dance major, you'll be in the College of Fine Arts, and so on and so forth. What we are looking for from the student is typically the same. The entrance requirements aren't going to vary because we know that students often change their minds. So you might come in thinking you want to study economics in the Adran College of Liberal Arts, and then eventually decide, you know what, I'd rather do strategic communication in the Bob Schieffer College of Communication. That's great. So we're not really looking for anything different. There are a couple of exceptions to that. I noted earlier how competitive our nursing program is. So there is a supplemental application that we ask our nursing students to submit. Once they submit their application to the university, inside the student portal, a link will appear for them to complete a couple of short answer questions specific to nursing. So that's one prime example. There are other programs that in our College of Fine Arts that are audition based. Dance, theater, and music. So there's some additional components there. But for the most part, students are going to be reviewed the same way. You'll be reviewed for entrance to the university as a whole, and then we will place you appropriately in the right college and the right department within that college.
Great. And, so that's definitely something that I get asked all the time because these kids are 17, 18. They may not know where they want to move in, right? And so, one of the most popular questions, which you already answered, was, what if I start at the School of Business and then decide I want to do communication, right? Is there going to be an extra application that I have to fill out? Is that an impacted major, right? And so, but it sounds like it sounds like it's pretty fluid, right? That students are able to move around, except for some of the more competitive programs like nursing and fine arts related fields.
Right. There may be an added layer. It doesn't make it impossible, though. So we really do try to create the sort of flexibility to honor the fact that these are people whose prefrontal cortexes aren't fully developed yet, and that's okay. I think it's patently unfair to ask a student at 16 or 17 what they want to do with the rest of their lives. So we have a curriculum that's designed for that level of flexibility.
That's great. And so as you're evaluating applications, Heath, what are some of the things that your team is looking for?
We get this question a lot, as you can imagine. And of course, being a selective college that employs a holistic evaluation process, what stands out for one student might not stand out for another, right? For one applicant, a fantastic essay could really knock our socks off. For another student, it could be a resume that blows us away. But for most students, and for the most part, the most important element to an application is the transcript. Because ultimately, what we're trying to do is to deliver to our faculty students who are going to be prepared for the rigors of the TCU education. So we could think the student is the greatest person in the world, but if their grades and curriculum choices don't match what the rest of the applicant pool looks like, then it's going to be in nobody's interest for us to admit that student. So I would say, above all else, we're looking at the student's academic record. Notice I didn't say anything about test scores. We are a test optional school right now. If a student submits a test score, we will look at it or we won't look at it depending on how strong a score it is. we have something called a do no harm policy. That's sort of our really rather progressive approach to test optional admission. That is, the submission of a score will never hurt a student. It can only enhance their profile. So just taking a step back to what I was saying before, the academic record is going to, for the most part, carry the day. Now, the reality is, with the number of applications that we get, like many colleges at our level, there are more students in our applicant pool who could do well than we actually have space for. So then what is it that we're looking for? And the answer there is TCU has an incredibly vibrant community. We are full of students who want to really sort of suck the marrow out of college life. And that's what we're looking for. So the way that we can assess that is, to what degree has the student been engaged in their community while they're in high school? That can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I don't necessarily mean the student has to have been student body president or captain of every team they played on. For some students, they're not all that enamored with their high schools, and they're getting involved in other ways in their larger community, and that's okay too. Other students have to work a lot of hours to help make ends meet for their family, and that's okay too. What we're trying to avoid is just enrolling a class of students who, went to school and then came home and played video games all day. Although we do have an intramural Xbox championship, so I should mention that.
Right, that's great. And I know it was a super open-ended question.
Yeah.
I'm sure you could have spent hours and hours just talking about that, right? And I think that's the national emergency testing that's going on. Okay. All right. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
But yes, absolutely. So I know it was super open-ended, but I love how you narrowed it down to really focusing on, first and foremost, the academics, because that is something that I will always tell students as well, that that's always going to be the most important piece, because the way colleges are reviewing your 4 years of high school, it's a little bit of a preview as to how they're expecting you to carry that forward into 4 years of college or more, right? And so you always want to make sure that you are demonstrating that, that strength and that intellectual curiosity and the rigor and all that good stuff. But thank you for putting that in perspective,
Good.
right, for students. And so just coming down to the essays component, right? What are some of the, do you have maybe one piece of advice for students who are furiously writing their essays right now?
Yeah, it's that time of year, right? We're just ahead of some of these early deadlines, and I suppose my one piece of advice would be, don't try to write the world's greatest college essay, because that is a really tall order. And frankly, most people who are 17 and 18 years old haven't really changed the world yet. We know you're going to, but you probably haven't cured a disease yet. You probably haven't scaled Kilimanjaro. That's okay. That is not our expectation. I have found, having read essays for many, many, many years, that some of my favorites are just slice of life pieces, little vignettes that help us get to know who you are a little bit better. One of my favorites was about a student who talked about his time at a bookstore in Milwaukee because he just loved books. And he found his way into this great bookstore and sat down in a corner and described the creases of the pages and the smells of that old bookstore. And that was really impactful for me as a reader. There's another essay I read years ago by a student who talked about what Christmas dinner in her family was like, and how she and her brother had this shared disdain for their aunt's cooking. And so they would always sort of steal away for a few minutes to have something else to eat that wasn't presented at the table. And it was like sort of their secret time together. Those are simple ideas, but they really bring some personality to the student. And so to the extent that you can do that as you're crafting these essays, I think you're going to be much more successful.
Right. And that's great. So, again, just wanting to talk a little bit about student life, right? And I know the rankings are not everything, but I have to stop for a moment and at least acknowledge the fact that the Princeton Review just ranked TCU as the #1 happiest, happiest students on campus, right? And you bagged the #1 spot for that. So congratulations.
Yeah. Thanks.
So, yeah, absolutely. So my follow-up question really is, what is TCU doing right? right, to be able to, win this, position?
Yeah. It's a really good question. And if I had the precise answer, then we would have that number one position every year. But I will say that I think it has a lot to do with the students we're recruiting and enrolling, and then they sort of pay it forward, right? Because when you're looking at colleges, one of the things that a student should be looking for is sort of personality type and whether you can envision yourself being there. And we tend to attract really nice, happy students. And so I do think that it just sort of feeds into itself. We've long felt like we've had a really happy campus. So it's nice to have this sort of external recognition. You noted the Princeton Review ranking, which was really nice and just came out about a month ago. I'll cite another source, and that is back in the spring of this year, a company called Resume.io did a study, and using artificial intelligence, they analyzed Instagram feeds for students from colleges all over. And they too said that TCU students were the happiest students around. And they did that by measuring the length of people's smiles in their Instagram photos. Now, you might say to yourself, well, that's just a bunch of baloney because everyone just curates an image of themselves on social media. And true, people do that, but everybody does that. It's not just TCU students who do that, right? So there is an apples to apples comparison to be made here. And the difference between TCU in the number one spot and the school that held the number two spot was greater than the difference between number 2 and number 10 in their scoring system. So our students are that much happier. I do think our students are really happy. You can see it when you come to campus. They're drenched in purple. They love being here. And there's one other statistic I'd like to cite that I think reinforces that. Because both of those things, Princeton Review and Resume.io, those are external sources. Our internal source is our retention rate. And 94% of our students came back this year who started last year. That's an extraordinary figure. So it tells you that there is something satisfying with the experience that's going on here. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that you can have this close contact with a group of people, fellow students, faculty, and staff, without having to sacrifice all of the resources that you might want at a school that maybe has a slightly different composition.
Right. And so I know you have, discussed this a little bit, but how would you define the vibe on campus?
Like one big love fest. I've been at TCU since 2012. And prior to that time, I spent many years as a college counselor. And part of my job, as you know, is traveling around and visiting different college campuses. So I've been to about 250 different colleges. And I had never, before I stepped foot on TCU's campus, been to a place like this, where there is this shared love affair for this space and these people. In fact, I remember thinking to myself, surely this is a facade. People can't actually be this pleasant. But it's true, we are. And like on some college campuses, I use this example. On some college campuses, I mean, everyone's friendly for the most part. It's rare to go to a college where you're going to be met with frowns. And if you do, then to turn around and leave. But like at most places, if you were to stop somebody and say, hey, can you tell me where, the bookstore is? They'll say, sure, go down the street and hang a right. That's the first building. But at TCU, I see this time and again. They will say, sure, let me take you there. And it's a subtle difference, but it's a profound difference. And that speaks to the character of the people on this campus. And it is why everyone here is so happy and what's so special.
Absolutely, Heath. In fact, that is something that I always tell students, even going back to my experience of being in college and when students, and that's exactly the example that I give them as well, that this is a place where, students are like, I'm going to take you there, right? Why don't
Yeah.
you follow me? And, I think that just makes a world of a difference, especially if you're in, if you've come in, from a different country or, and you would appreciate that extra handholding and that support. And I think it speaks volumes about the culture that exists at a college campus.
Yeah.
Right?
So to answer your question, I think that's the vibe. It's a friendly vibe. It's an inclusive vibe. We talk about, and you mentioned, how some students, if they're coming from a great distance and from a different culture, that can be a divide that needs to be intentionally bridged. And so we are really thoughtful about that. What does it mean to have culture at TCU? What is what we call this framework of inclusive excellence? Because it doesn't just happen. I mean, there is some of it that's organic based on the students who we tend to attract, but there's a lot of thought behind it too, to make sure that there is space here for everybody.
Right. And I know you mentioned that, so you've traveled to 250 college campuses, which is amazing, right? So how would how would you compare TCU to some of the other colleges in Texas, right? So for instance, just, by virtue of being on the West Coast, I'll have many students who are going to say, and families, that we like the coast. We're not so certain about, like the more inland states. So, so maybe they haven't had a chance to really travel as much, right, to Texas. So how would you, and again, another very, super open-ended question, but how would you compare TCU vis-a-vis some of the other colleges that are around?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to answer. There were sort of a couple questions in there that you asked, so I want to make sure I get to everything. First of all, for families who are coming from the coast, I grew up in California. I went to college on the East Coast. If you would have asked me 20 years ago if I would have landed in Texas, I would have said no way. But I'm very happy that I'm here. My family is being raised here. This is just a great place to live. And I think it provides students with an alternate cultural experience. Texas is very different from other parts of the United States. That's not a good thing or a bad thing. It just is. What is a good thing, I think, is when you're thinking about the 4 years that you spend after high school or whenever a student decides to enter college, to try something new. Because if you stay where you've been your whole life and you don't venture out and do something new, the chances are you will never do that. So I love the idea of going somewhere that's a little bit different. And this is a really attractive area to be as well. Being in the middle of the country has huge travel advantages. I can get on a plane at DFW Airport and get pretty much anywhere in the United States within about 3 hours or less. If you're in the Pacific Northwest, maybe a little bit longer, but it's not. You don't have to change flights. So the ease of travel is really great. The weather here is pretty darn good, except for the summer when it's oppressively hot, but you won't be here during the summer. And DFW is a very culturally rich area. So you're not coming to this monolithic sort of entity, but you're actually going to be able to engage with people who come from all over the place. And I alluded to earlier, this being the number 4 market in the United States behind New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. So varied economies that are here, great job opportunities for students when they're in school and beyond school. You can see Taylor Swift 3 nights in a row at Cowboy Stadium if you want. Like anything that you want to do, it's all right here. As to your other question about the comparison to other schools in the region, it's kind of a hard question to answer because I live TCU and I work at TCU and I really don't spend time at those other schools. What I can say is we are blessed to have abundant options here in the state of Texas, and students who are looking at TCU very much should look at some of those other schools that they might be considering. Sometimes we look a lot alike on paper, and when you come visit us in person, it will become abundantly clear how different we are from one another. And again, that's not a values judgment. It's not good or bad. It's just that we're different. And we always want students to be at the school where they're going to feel most comfortable. I hope it's TCU, but if it's not TCU, that's okay too.
Absolutely. I love how you shared that, right? And I think it really helps to put things in perspective for many families. Visit. If you get a chance, that's always what I'm telling students. If not, they can always do a virtual visit. But of course, the earlier that they can actually come in and set foot on campus and actually see the happy, smiling students for themselves, it's going to be a completely different experience, right, for them. So thank you so much, Heath. I know we're at time. And I really appreciate all the wonderful advice and the insights that you provided, which I know families would find it harder just to find online, right? So appreciate your time. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Thank you for having me. I've appreciated it as well.